Okay, so the final concept that we're going to discuss, okay, the final sort of cornerstone of behavioral economics is something known as the availability heuristic. This is also sometimes called availability bias. Okay, and this describes the tendency of people to sort of overweight outcomes which are easier to imagine or easier to remember. Okay, and this. Hold on one second. I can't turn the light on here. It's getting so dark. This arises from the way that people tend to make choices. Okay, because think about how you typically make a choice. Say I give you two alternatives. Okay, that's two different laptops that you could buy. Let's say. Well, how are you going to decide between them? Usually, what you do is you simply imagine yourself using either laptop, right? And if whichever sort of imagination seems more preferable to you, okay, well then that's the laptop that you go with. Okay, the availability heuristic says that well, as a natural consequence of that, then our ability to choose is sort of limited or constrained by our ability to imagine. Okay, so let me give you some examples of this. So, question. Suppose I randomly select a word from the English language. Which of the following is more likely? That I select a word that begins with the letter K, or that I select a word whose third letter is K? Okay. Now, if you're like most people and you're presented with this question, you would probably answer, well, I think the first one is more common. Okay. And that's probably what I would answer too, right? And the reason for that, it's very easy to recall words that begin with the letter K. You might think, well, there's kitchen, there's kangaroo. Okay, there's a lot of words that start with the letter K. But it's much harder to immediately remember or call to mind words whose third letter is K. But if you really were to look it up in a dictionary, you realize actually there's quite a few words whose third letter is K, like ask or acknowledge. And in reality, there's K, the letter K appears roughly 3 times more as the third letter in a word than it does as the first letter. So that's, I think, a very, very sort of very basic example, okay, of this availability heuristic idea. Okay. Give you some other examples. Okay, so this study was conducted at the University of Chicago. Okay, University of Chicago has a very well-known business program, and the business students there, they were asked to they were basically presented with the opportunity to purchase life insurance before traveling to a business conference in Thailand. Okay, and some were presented with a plan that covered only the departing and the return flight. Okay, so you can buy health insurance and it's going to cover, if you die on the incoming or the outgoing flight. Others were given a plan that covered the entire duration of the trip, both the flight and the stay. Okay, and the study recorded how much students were willing to pay for a $100,000 life insurance plan given either one of these choices. Okay, so I want you guys to guess what you think, or think about what you would want, okay, and then maybe also guess what the study found. Okay, and what they found, remarkably, was that students were willing to pay roughly twice as much for the first plan. $14 versus an average of $7. Now, that's remarkable, right? Because the first plan is strictly worse than the second plan, right? The second plan includes everything that the first plan has, but it also covers your stay. It's strictly better, right? And so, okay, so why was this? And the answer is, again, this idea of the availability heuristic. When people are choosing plans, what they're doing is they're sort of imagining the trip, right? And so if you have a plan that covers the flight, and I ask you whether or not you want to buy this plan, what you're going to imagine is the flight. And well, hey, I mean, flying is kind of dangerous, right? If if I bring up the term life insurance and flight in the same sentence, you're going to be thinking about, oh, what if my plane crashes? What if there's terrorism? Okay, and those are pretty vivid things to imagine, right? Those things seem pretty threatening. But if I'm selling you a plan for the whole trip, most of the time what people are going to then be picturing is, well, the whole trip. And most of the trip, of course, is when you're there chilling out in Thailand at your conference. Okay. And so, you might picture yourself, on the beach in Thailand, sipping a pina colada or eating some pad see ew. You might picture yourself listening to some kind of, interesting presentation at the conference. And all of those situations seem a lot less dangerous, right? I'm taking a vacation to Thailand. What is there to worry about? Okay. And so because you're not imagining the flight so much, this threat of, imminent death seems much, much less. And so you're less willing to purchase life insurance because of it. Okay. Interesting, right? So here's another example. So let's suppose that you have a test that it indicates that somebody has a 5% chance of acquiring a rare form of cancer. Okay, and so you take this test and you say it's some sort of genomics test like 23andMe kind of thing. Okay, and you find out, okay, you got a 5% chance of getting this cancer, and if you want to, you can engage in a treatment that has significant side effects. But at the end of that treatment, you're going to reduce your chance of getting that cancer to 0. Okay. Now, if you present the choice like that, okay, most people would choose to engage in the treatment. Okay. However, say that the same treatment lowers your risk from 55% to 50%. Well, in that case, most patients would refuse the treatment. Okay, they would say, well, I'm only lowering it from 55 to 50. It's sort of a toss-up either way. There's significant side effects with the treatment. Why would I get this treatment? Okay. Now, here's the thing. Both of these treatments would save exactly the same number of lives. Okay, if you had 100 people choose to get the first treatment, 100 people choose to get the second treatment versus not, it would save an additional 5% of lives in either case. Okay. But you see, this is, again, it's like what we're doing when we imagine the two alternatives, right? It's a much more vivid contrast between a 0% chance and a 5% chance, right? Because what do you picture in that case? You picture either 0% chance, I don't get cancer, or 5% chance, you picture you do get cancer, right? And the difference between having and not having cancer obviously is enough to motivate a lot of people. If the choice is 55 versus 50%, that's hard to even conceptualize, right? In your mind, it's all the same. It's just a toss-up either way, right? And so because it's harder to visualize that difference, or because you don't really visualize that difference in the same way when you're presented with that question, a lot more people choose this second option. Okay. Now, I also want to bring up the fact that, a lot of these concepts, a lot of these studies are actually related, right? Because you could argue that this is also an example of a framing effect. Based on how I'm presenting the situation, people are making a different choice. It's also sort of an example of, of reference dependence, right? Because, the reference of, you could argue that in this first case, the anchor point is 0. And in the other case, this anchor point is 50%. And that's a lot, greater of a percentage change from 0 to 5, right? That's a change of infinite percent, right? Versus 50 to 55, which is only like a couple of percent gain. Okay, so all of these concepts are really very much interrelated to one another. Okay. Okay, now another interesting thing, okay, is doctors who are presented with this hypothetical choice, okay, usually both of these choices usually prescribe the treatment for a patient, but turn it down for themselves. Okay. Okay. Okay, I'll give you one final example. Okay, availability heuristic. consider the following options, okay? You can get $1,000 now, or you can get $1,050 1 week from now, okay? What do you choose? Now, if you're like most people would choose the $1,000 right now. Yeah. Give you the same choice. You can have $1,000 a year in the future, or you can have $1,050 1 year and 1 week in the future. Okay. Now, now if you present people with this second choice, the overwhelming majority of people choose $1,050 1 week and 1 year in the future. They choose the second choice. Okay. But if you think about it, there's a sense in which that's quite irrational, right? Because say you choose that second choice, okay, and then you wait 1 year. Well, then in 1 year, that second choice will have become the first choice. And what are you saying then? That you would reverse what you would chose before? Well, so this again is a consequence of the availability heuristic. And in this case, this is sort of usually it's caused by the way people conceptualize spending the money, right? Because in the first situation, you're thinking about getting the money essentially immediately, right? And so, often in that situation, we're going to ask ourselves, okay, what would we do with that money right now, right? $1,000, you could get $1,000 today, or wait another week and just get a little extra money, right? Well, if I get that money this week, I can do it, right? I can go on vacation. I can buy something that I've been wanting to buy for a while. Maybe I can fix up my car. My car's been needing repair. I can just go fix it up, and I can do that right now, not a week from now. Okay, that seems pretty tempting, right? But the money that's coming in the future, right? You think about that same money a year from now, you tend to view that money a little bit differently, right? You're going to view that money as a little bit more of an investment, right? It's almost like you're saving that money way in the future. And you're probably not going to think as much about, some sort of immediate use for that money, but maybe you might picture, saving that money or putting it towards school or putting it towards a car. Okay, and so the way that we imagine using that money differs if we're thinking about that money being received in the future. And of course, that can drive a bit of a different choice. Okay. This availability heuristic, I think in many ways, it's a very important thing to be aware of. Okay. Because I think that, when we go about making decisions in our daily lives, we need to be sort of aware of this, okay? One thing that I think this matters a lot for is people's imagining of sort of different sorts of risk, right? Like, for example, if you ask people, like, what do you think the odds are of you, being shot or dying in like a terrorist attack or like a mass shooting or something, and people will say things like 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000, when in reality the chances are far, far smaller than that, much closer to 1 in a million or 1 in 100 million. Okay. But the reason why people view that risk as a lot more likely is because it's so available, right? All the time we see reports in the media of these sorts of crimes happening. And so because it's so vivid and so easy to bring that thought to mind, we sort of have an illusion that those types of events are much more common than they actually are. And unfortunately, what that leads to in American society is, a stronger distrust of your fellow man, right? You see this stuff happening on the news and you're like, oh my God, this stuff must be happening all the time. And then you feel kind of paranoid. You feel like, hey, I gotta, install a fancy lock on my door, or I feel like I gotta arm myself in order to protect myself. When in reality, right, your chances of dying in just a car accident are like a bajillion times more likely. Okay. And so, I think when you're thinking about these types of things, when you're asked to evaluate some sort of extreme event, okay, remember the availability heuristic. okay, that is going to bias you towards maybe overweighting these very, very unlikely scenarios. Okay. Okay. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this lecture. Okay. We've seen, I think, many, many examples of these three types of behavioral economic effects. Um, please have a look at the listening. Okay, do the listening on your homework. It's a really interesting one, and answer the associated questions there and following each of the videos. And I hope you guys have a nice weekend, and I'll see you guys back here next week where we will be starting a new unit.